bring my Bible over. Good idea to have that with me, right? Just spinning there. So, yes, okay. Looks like we are live. Good morning, friends. Good morning. Uh, Welcome to December 22nd, 2020. 12/22/2020. We're almost there, friends. We've almost made it through this year. I think today marks 5 years that we've been in this year, or at least that's certainly how it seemed, right? I'm Brian. I'm the pastor at Christ United Methodist Church in Waynesboro, PA, which we sit right on the border with Maryland. Um, I never got notification that this was going live, so hopefully it's working. There we are. But good to have you joining me here this morning. It's Tuesday morning, and it's the 22nd. So what that means is since we started on December 1st with reading a chapter a day of Luke, since today is the 22nd, then that means we will be looking at chapter 22. Uh, and after today, there will be 2 more days because Luke has 24 chapters in it. We'll be finishing it up on Thursday, which is Christmas Eve. That was why we picked this. I thank you all for your kind words, your messages, and I'm glad that you found this beneficial, worthwhile experience. And I'm looking at some options for what to do after that. So I guess I will continue to do something, at least for the foreseeable future, since we most likely will continue to only be doing things online, based on how things are going in the area. But like I said, I got a couple different thoughts, couple different ideas as far as what I'll be doing, what we'll be doing every day. So stay posted. I'll probably have a decision made by Thursday. By Thursday. So anyway, let's get to it, shall we? Luke chapter 22, which is a long chapter, a very long chapter. Um, Personally, I think it probably should have been broken down into a couple others, but too much of it is connected. Too much of it is connected. It is a good portion of the story. We're gonna basically be covering Holy Thursday, Holy Thursday, right up to and including Jesus's arrest and the beginning of the stages of the trial of Jesus. So that's where we're going to be starting from. Um, the first verse you're going to hear, it's going to make reference to a time, to a time of year anyway. Mentions the festival of unleavened bread, which is called Passover. That's the opening words of 22. If you go back and you read through Exodus, you'll find that the festival of unleavened bread and the celebration of Passover were separate events. Those were two different things, but but very close in time. So by the time you get to the first century, um, they had sort of been blended into a single event, a single event. So that's why Luke writes it in this fashion. Oh, and I should have said again, if you want to send a comment or something, I see some folks saying good morning and things like that. Good to have you with us. But if you needed a question, you want to ask a question or a comment, you can put it on the stream. You can also send me a text. I'll try to reply to both of those things, but I may not see them right away. So I may not see some of the stuff until after we're done. Text is 570-351-1619. So now let's get to chapter 22. The festival of unleavened bread, which is called Passover, was approaching. The chief priests and the legal experts were looking for a way to kill Jesus because they were afraid of the people. Uh, Luke emphasizes numerous times that so many of the decisions that the legal experts, the chief priests and the ruling religious authorities, their decisions were all based on politics, on how they would look. They wanted things done, but they were afraid of the people. Then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, who was one of the 12. And if you think of Satan as evil personified, fine. But if not, that's also okay. We can easily translate that to say temptation entered Jesus, entered Judas. He went out and discussed with the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard how he could hand Jesus over to them. They were delighted and arranged payment for him. He agreed and began looking for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them, a time when the crowds would be absent. Again, afraid of the people. The day of unleavened bread arrived when the Passover had to be sacrificed. Jesus sent Peter and John with this task: "Go and prepare for us to eat the Passover meal." They said to him, "Where do you want us to prepare it?" Jesus replied, "When you go into the city, a man carrying a water jar will meet you. Follow him to the house he enters. Say to the owner of the house, 'The teacher says to you, where is the guest room where I can eat the Passover meal with my disciples?'" Pause. Guest room is Guadalupe. If you remember back from day 2 of Luke, that Guadalupe was the is the guest room, means guest room, and in a lot of old translations, it's the word that gets translated in. It doesn't mean in; it means guest room. And here, same word, being translated guest room, and then also referred to as upper room. Really, only a couple steps up from the main living space. Where is the guest room where I can eat the Passover meal with my disciples? He will show you a large upstairs room already furnished. Make preparations there. They went and found everything just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. Pause. Of course, there's a lot of different discussion about how that happened, how that took place. Was Jesus just predicting all this stuff and knew all this kind of things, or did he make some arrangements in advance? Since the room upstairs was already prepared, already furnished and all that kind of stuff. Whatever. It could be either of those, I suppose. Not so much a big deal. What the more important part here is the fact that they were preparing to celebrate the Passover. And the Passover meal is, and it said that the day of unleavened bread arrived when the Passover had to be sacrificed. That would be referring to the sacrificial lamb, the lamb that had to be sacrificed for the Passover meal. And all of the gospel authors, especially John, this is important. This is important, and they're making everyone know, and it's foreshadowing, I guess you would say as well, that Jesus is the sacrificial lamb. And they prepared the Passover meal. When the time came, Jesus took his place at the table, and the apostles joined him. He said to them, "I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." Pause. Should have stopped early. um, Jesus took his place at the table. There was I guess you'd say there's assigned seating at first century dinners, especially for the Passover. And Jesus would have had to take a particular spot. I'm not going to go into all the details. Um, I when I'm doing an in-depth study on John, I would explain that, and I think I even did it in a sermon back in the spring. But Jesus would have been in a particular spot because he was the host of the meal. He was the host of the meal. He said to them, "I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. I tell you, I won't eat it until it is fulfilled in God's kingdom. This Passover is sort of a mirror, a precursor to the full Passover meal within God's kingdom. After taking a cup and giving thanks, he said, "Take this and share it among yourselves. I tell you that from now on I won't drink from the fruit of the vine until God's kingdom has come." Pause. He's not talking about heaven or the return of the kingdom. I don't believe, and he's really just talking about until his sacrifice is complete. That it would be the institution of God's kingdom. After taking the bread and giving thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, he took the cup after the meal and said, "This cup is the new covenant by my blood, which is poured out for you." Pause. Really, those are elements of the Passover meal. Jesus is Jesus is repurposing them and giving them a fuller meaning, a different meaning, rather than the breaking of the lamb. It's the breaking of himself. It's symbolized through the bread. But look, my betrayer is with me. His hand is on this table. The human one goes just as it has been determined. But how terrible it is for that person who betrays him. They began to argue among themselves about which of them it could possibly be who would do this. Excuse me. Pause. So their disciples did a lot of arguing with each other, but they're trying to decide, well, which one of you is the traitor? Because I know it's not me, kind of thing. Um, Pointing fingers and all that. But how terrible it is for that person who betrays him. Obviously Luke and the gospel writers all had a bad opinion of Judas. Bad opinion of Judas. Matthew describes him his death, describes him killing himself, hanging himself. Mark doesn't say anything. Luke doesn't say anything. John doesn't say anything. Now, when Luke writes Acts, he does refer to Judas's death and his suicide in a different way. He doesn't say that he hung from a tree. He says that he threw himself off of a high cliff into the field, and his body split open, and pretty gross. Um, so, what is Jesus saying about this? That how terrible it is for that person who betrays him. Was Judas beyond forgiveness? Would it have been possible? So Judas just really never gave himself the chance, based on Matthew and on Acts. He didn't wait around. He wasn't there for the resurrection. Um, so he didn't give himself the chance, and he never asked for forgiveness. So we don't know. Is it was he beyond forgiveness? There's an 18th century, no, I'm sorry, 19th century. I think it's 19th century poem, a story called "The Ballad of Judas Iscariot." Robert Bachman or something like that. He wrote it. Google it, you'll find it and read through it. I think it's a wonderful story, a wonderful tale of redemption, even though it's post death. So, the Ballad of Judas Iscariot. Look it up. The language is difficult, but because it's very Victorian, but go past that, and I think you'll like it. Anyway, an argument broke out among the disciples over which one of them should be regarded as the greatest. Here they go again. But Jesus said to them, "The kings of the Gentiles rule over their subjects, and those in authority over them are called friends of the people. That's not the way it will be with you. Instead, the greatest among you must become like a person of low status, and the leader like a servant." So, which one is greater, the one who is seated at the table or the one who serves at the table? Isn't it the one who is seated at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. Pause. Uh, Jesus is trying to correct their thinking. The disciples are thinking hierarchical structure, they're thinking with human minds as far as who is greatest. But Jesus says, I don't want you to think like that. I don't want you to try to putting yourselves above each other. The more important thing is is faithfulness. It's discipleship. It's acting and living the way I have acted and lived. Well, acted, lived, and loved. Um, and so get that out of your heads. Think like this. Be the servant. Continuing, you are the ones who have continued with me in my trials, and I confer royal power on you, just as my Father granted royal power to me. Thus you will eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on thrones overseeing the 12 tribes of Israel. Again, it's this call to following, to discipleship, and yes, you will be with me. You will be with me. Simon, Simon, look, Satan has asserted the right to sift you all like wheat. However, I have prayed for you that your faith won't fail. When you have returned, strengthen your brothers and sisters. Pause. When you have returned, Jesus says, I've prayed that your faith won't fail. Not that you won't fail, not that you're not going to deny me, because that's the next statement here, um, but that your faith won't fail, and that when you return after your after you are tempted and succumb to that temptation, after you deny me, when you return, strengthen your brothers and sisters. Peter responded, Lord, I'm ready to go with you both to prison and to death. Jesus replied, I tell you, Peter, the rooster won't crow today before you have denied me, before you have denied 3 times that you knew me. Jesus said to them, when I sent you out with a wallet, bag, or sandals, you didn't lack anything, did you? And they said nothing. Then he said to them, but now, whoever has a wallet must take it, and likewise a bag. And those who don't own a sword must sell their clothes and buy one. I tell you that this scripture must be fulfilled in relation to me. And he was accounted among criminals. Indeed, what's written about me is nearing completion. They said to him, Lord, look, here are 2 swords. He replied, enough of that. Okay, so pause. Um, so Jesus is changing is what he told his disciples. He said, last time I told you, just go, don't take anything with you. Now you need to be prepared. You need to be prepared for your journey. This is more than just for a half a day. This is more than just a day. You need to be prepared against all kind of things. Now Luke does have this thing in there about the swords. Uh, Jesus says, that if you don't have one, you should probably buy one. Sell your clothes if you need to buy a sword. Maybe he's just making an extra preparation for being prepared. But Luke is one. This might also be just setting things up, because in just like whatever a dozen verses, somebody at the garden has a sword and cut off a slave's ear. So how do you explain that? Well, this explains how the guy had a sword, because they were talking about it, and 2 of the guys took swords. But Jesus says, when they say, hey, look, Lord, we have 2 swords, he doesn't say, great, good job, or boy, that's not enough. He says, enough of that. Not enough of the swords, enough of this whole conversation. So maybe it's a case of them still just not getting it, taking things too literally. You're not understanding what I'm saying. Enough of that. Enough of that. Let's move on. So Jesus left and made his way to the Mount of Olives, as was his custom, and the disciples followed him. When he arrived, he said to them, I should say, the Mount of Olives isn't too far outside of the city of Jerusalem, and it's up on the hill. Um, Hope to be going there with my trip to the Holy Land next October. When he arrived, he said to them, pray that you won't give in to temptation. He withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down, and prayed. He said, Father, if it's your will, Take this cup of suffering away from me. However, not my will, but your will must be done." Then a heavenly angel appeared to him and strengthened him. He was in anguish and prayed even more earnestly. His sweat became like drops of blood falling on the ground. When he got up from praying, he went to the disciples. He found them asleep, overcome by grief. He said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray so that you won't give in to temptation." Pause. Of course, all kind of stuff in there. So Jesus prays to God the Father, "If it's your will, take this cup away from me, this cup of suffering. But if not, not my will, your will. I'll do whatever you think is necessary." Leslie Weatherhead, in his book The Will of God, and I recommend that one to your reading. I talked about this last year in a series I did. Excuse me. That the cross was not always. Jesus was not born to die on a cross. The cross is not part of God's intentional will. The intentional will of God was that people follow him, that we modify our ways of living and follow Jesus and live the type of life that God asks us to live. When that became impossible, the circumstances led to Jesus being crucified. God used those circumstances to achieve God's ultimate will of salvation and redemption. So um, the circumstances are forcing the cross, but God's will is going to be to use that cross to make it to accomplish God's ultimate will, which is salvation. Now, you've probably seen uh, pictures, paintings, definitely not photos, obviously, paintings or stained glass windows of this scene, and maybe even in movies and stuff like that. And they take it so literally, but actually not even literally. They perhaps it's a mistranslation or a misinterpretation that has Jesus sweating drops of blood, actual blood. You see blood forming on his brow and falling to this stone that he's kneeling next to. Wonderful imagery, yes, but that's not what Luke says. That's not what it says. It said sweat like drops of blood. His sweat became like drops of blood, not actual blood. The difference would be, normal drop of sweat, kind of just appears and maybe flows down and drips. But think of a drop of blood, usually much more viscous, much thicker than sweat, and almost hanging perhaps and plopping on the ground. So does that change the imagery? Does that change it? That's what Luke is describing in that it's like a drop of blood. Uh, Not that it changed color or anything like that, but it wasn't actual blood, but just different in appearance than regular sweat. Continuing the reading. Yep, this one's getting long, I know. While Jesus was still speaking, a crowd appeared, and the one called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. Jesus said to him, "Judas, would you betray the human one with a kiss?" Pause. Uh, Look up the song "Why" by Michael Card. Beautiful song. Beautiful song. When those around him recognized what was about to happen, they said, "Lord, should we fight with our swords?" There's the swords. One of them struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. Jesus responded, "Stop! No more of that." No more of this, sorry. He touched the slave's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come to get him, "Have you come with swords and clubs to arrest me, as though I were a thief? Day after day, I was with you in the temple, but you didn't arrest me. But this is your time, when darkness rules." After they arrested Jesus, they led him away and brought him to the high priest's house. Peter followed from a distance. When they lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. Then a servant woman saw him sitting in the firelight. She stared at him and said, "This man was with him too." But Peter denied it, saying, "Woman, I don't know him." A little while later, someone else saw him and said, "You are one of them too." But Peter said, "Man, I'm not." An hour or so later, someone else insisted, "This man must have been with him because he is a Galilean too." Probably, probably knew that from his dialect, from his accent. Peter responded, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." At that very moment, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. And Peter remembered the Lord's words, "Before a rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And Peter went out and cried uncontrollably. So Jesus failed in his temptation, but hopefully his faith hasn't failed him. Remember, that was what Jesus prayed and was encouraging him about, so that he will return. The men who were holding Jesus in custody taunted him while they beat him. They blindfolded him and asked him repeatedly, "Prophesy, who hit you?" Insulting him, they said many other horrible things against him. Pause. Luke is the one. Luke has a very good opinion, a high opinion of the prophets of old, and a very low opinion of the religious leaders and stuff like that. And it's kind of concentrated even in this little scene. And this ties back into Jesus's parable about the landowner, the vineyard owner who sent people and they beat him, and he was talking about the prophets. So this is kind of tying into that. It's also perhaps slightly more understated, but I think it's there anyway. A misunderstanding of prophecy and what the job of a prophet was. They wanted him to foretell the future. Okay, tell us who's hitting you. That's more of a magic trick. That's what a mentalist would do. But a prophet is a person who speaks with and for God. So even though these people are working at the temple and probably should know what they're doing, even though they're not the religious leaders, they're the guards. They're they're treating Jesus as a prophet, but misunderstanding what a prophet was supposed to do. As morning came, the elders of the people, both chief priests and legal experts, came together, and Jesus was brought before their council. They said, "If you are the Christ, tell us." Pause. I should pause there. Okay, so it's as morning is it's come to morning now. Um, that not all the gospels agree that it was morning. John in particular has the trials taking place overnight, which was a violation of Jewish law. Luke does have it taking place in the morning, so it's a little different. "If you are the Christ, tell us." He answered, "If I tell you, you won't believe, and if I ask you a question, you won't answer. But from now on, the human one will be seated on the right hand of the power, the I'm sorry, on the right side of the power of God." They all said, "Are you God's son then?" He replied, "You say that I am." Then they said, "Why do we need further testimony? We've heard it from his own lips." End of chapter 22. Now, Jesus doesn't actually say, they ask him the question, "Are you God's son?" He doesn't say yes. He says, "You say that I am." But they construe that, twist it around, and say, "Oh, we don't need anything further. He said it from his own lips." No, he never actually said it. He said that you said it. But that's not that Jesus denied it. Jesus said it in other places, but he didn't confess it there because it needs to be thrown back on them. Anyway, so that's it for today's reading. 2 more days, 23 and 24. I will see you tomorrow. Have a great day, friends.